in the first reading for the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time from Isaiah chapter 6. The man, Isaiah, is terrified. I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have looked at the King, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah is in the temple, as it is filled with smoke at the Lord's appearance, seated on a throne. Smoke, cloud, and fire are biblical symbols of divine presence, as in the Exodus experience of the fiery, cloudy pillar, or as in Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai, or as when a cloud fills the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, in Exodus 40. So too, on the Mount of Transfiguration, when Jesus and his chosen disciples are covered in a cloud, as the Lord speaks from heaven. This is the glory of the divine presence that the Hebrew Bible calls the Shekinah. And Isaiah clearly knows also the tradition that no one can see God and live, yet God reaches out to him. Isaiah says, then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding in his hand a live coal, which he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. This is one of the seraphim who are surrounding the divine throne. With this, with the coal, the live coal, with this he touched my mouth and said, see now, this has touched your lips, your sin is taken away, your iniquity is purged. And Isaiah is inspired and empowered to respond to God's call. Whom shall I send? Who will be our messenger? I answered, here am I, send me. That's Isaiah 6, verse 8. In the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time, the Gospel is from St. Luke chapter 5, where Simon Peter echoes Isaiah's response to a divine call. He, Simon Peter, falls at the feet of Jesus, crying out, depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinner. What has prompted this in Peter? When we compare the different gospel accounts of the calling of the disciples, this seems to have been through a process of gradual acquaintance. St. John's Gospel tells of an early encounter with Jesus in the place where John the Baptist is preaching and baptizing. In Mark and Matthew, the decisive call to discipleship finally comes when Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, and after them James and John, have been fishing in the lake. In St. Luke's fleshed out version of this encounter, two of the fishermen are washing their nets after a night's fishing, and James and John are in their boat mending their nets. And Jesus is standing on the shore with the crowd pressing round him. He sees the four men and asks to borrow a boat and for them to put it out from shore a little way. Then he sits down and continues to teach the crowds. Now note this, sitting to speak was a sign of teaching authority in the ancient world. And as in the Greek theatre of the time, the water between Jesus and the crowd on shore, like the water that is placed between the stage and the audience in a Greek theatre of the time, it would act as an acoustic mirror, bouncing Jesus' voice up to the crowd on shore, much better than being muffled by an eager crowd pressing close. And St. Luke fleshes out this lakeside call to Simon Peter still further, where Mark and Matthew have compressed it. Luke now has this story of a remarkable catch of fish, far more fish than they had bargained for or could handle, exceeding all measure and confounding Simon Peter's initial doubts. Master, we worked hard all night long and caught nothing, but if you say so, I will pay out the nets. And to be fair, Fishing did, apparently, mostly take place at night. But even so, this prodigious catch against all expectation brings Simon Peter to a moment of sudden realization. He somehow senses in Jesus the very holiness of God, and he is afraid, like Isaiah. But Jesus says to him, "Do not be afraid." And this is not to deny Jesus' holiness, nor to play down Peter's lack of faith. Both Isaiah and Simon Peter understood their own radical unworthiness before a holy God. When Peter confesses himself a sinner, he makes himself one for whom Jesus comes to bring salvation. This is a constant theme in St. Luke's Gospel: confession of need, of unworthiness, met by compassion and forgiveness. Think of the story of Jesus' encounter with the now repentant tax collector, Zacchaeus. Or, again, Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. Those two texts are found only in Luke's Gospel. In the remarkable catch of fish, we are reminded how Jesus always gives beyond measure. To us, he gives us himself, and with that, all other things we may ever truly need. And as if this were destined to be an enduring sign of the meaning of divine grace, of the future kingdom, and of every disciple's calling to witness to that kingdom, St. John's Gospel, in a final and, we think, added chapter 21, records a repeat of this same sign of divine grace and plenty, again at the lake where the disciples' calling was first confirmed, and where Simon Peter will now avow his love for his risen Lord and receive from him 3 times the command, "Feed my sheep." The Gospels were written at a time and in a culture where Jew and pagan alike could not conceive that divine being could be clothed in our flesh. The Gospels, by contrast, show us Jesus in all the details of his ministry and his death in such a way as to show his complete humanity. Yet they also show us one whose humanity is capable of wonderful powers. And moreover, he speaks with authority and not as the scribes, the interpreters, the authoritative interpreters, then, of Mosaic law. Yet this is not enough. The Gospel's message to us is that this is indeed God, the eternal Son of the Father, the Holy God of Israel, through whom all things are made. The Word made flesh, who dwelt among us. The Holy One, holy not by grace, not by divine gift, but holy by nature, the divine nature that is in him. That's most fully spelt out, of course, in the prologue to the Gospel of John, in John chapter 1. It may seem elsewhere muted by comparison, but in the other Gospels, there's no mistaking the message's presence there too. And as we see in the 5th Sunday of Ordinary Time's second reading from 1 Corinthians 15, St. Paul makes no bones about the teaching of the early church. I taught you what I had been taught myself. The Greek text adds the phrase en protois, as of first importance, namely that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised to life on the 3rd day in accordance with the scriptures. For St. Paul, as for the early church as a whole, and in the Gospels, Jesus' resurrection is the clinching argument. To repeat, Christ gives himself. He imparts to us divine life, and with that, all other things we may ever need. Sometimes, perhaps, we feel he is giving too much, and more than we would have quite wished for. Sometimes the gift threatens to turn our life upside down, as it did for Isaiah and Simon Peter. Sometimes, too, the gift can be very hidden, coming to us under a veil of suffering or loss. Yet, if ever we think that God is somehow miserly with his gifts, or treats us somehow unfairly or harshly, then perhaps we might ask for something of the spirit of Isaiah and Simon Peter alike. Who am I, Lord, to be receiving so much? When we approach the Shekinah, the divine presence, the glory of the divine presence in the sacrament of the altar, we come to be in a special way in the presence of perfect holiness. Through the Holy Eucharist, the sacrifice of Christ's saving death and the power of his resurrection are made present for us, and he himself becomes fully present to us through these sacramental signs. So, much like the centurion in Luke chapter 7 and Matthew chapter 8, we at the Eucharist cry out, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and we say, my soul shall be healed. But as with Isaiah, as with Simon Peter, the Lord in his greatness reaches out to us in our lowliness and unworthiness, and raises us up to himself. So we may approach Christ at his altar, not presuming, indeed no, but with confidence. For we know well, and we are reminded in case we should ever forget, that we have been called to the supper of the Lamb, and as such, we are blessed indeed.